As you may know, or you might guess from my being here, I'm not currently serving as pastor of a congregation, but I am still privy to conversations among pastors serving churches by virtue of being a member of a couple of private Facebook groups, which are for pastors and other church leaders. And it probably won't surprise you to know that for quite a while now, much of that conversation has revolved around the question of how to be the church in the midst of a pandemic, how to conduct virtual worship, how to offer communion online, what platform is best to use for live streaming a worship service, how to avoid getting Zoom bombed during a Bible study, and so on. Some of you here have no doubt had some of those kinds of conversations over the last several months. But things are changing now. More and more people are getting vaccinated. Sadly, not everybody, but still there is progress. The government finally has lifted the COVID restrictions and declared the state open for business. And folks are thinking about how to be together again. My own extended family celebrated the 4th of July with a large gathering outside, but everybody had to have been vaccinated. So things are going back to normal, but not quite normal. Back to what was, but not exactly to what had been. And the question being raised now by businesses within communities and by congregations is, what do things look like going forward? What will life be like on the other side? We know, of course, that it won't necessarily all be smooth sailing ahead. Some people still are resisting those vaccinations, while new strains of the virus keep popping up, and some predict yet another COVID wave, the fourth one for our county, as I understand it. Happily, it's not expected to be anything like what we've already been through. And so we have made it through the worst of it. We have survived the storm, so to speak, and now we face the question of exactly what life will look like, what the church will be like, what the church should be like on the other side of this pandemic. Our situation is something like that of the disciples in our story today from the Gospel of Mark. You see, this is a story about crossing over to the other side. In fact, the narrative itself tells us as much. It's very plain. In the opening verse, Jesus says to his disciples, "Let us go across to the other side." He's been teaching beside the Sea of Galilee, where such large crowds have gathered that at one point he got into a boat, pushed a bit out from the shore, and taught from there. And then after telling a number of parables, he tells his disciples that it's time to get in the boat and cross to that other side. What they are crossing, of course, is the Sea of Galilee, which is actually a very large freshwater lake. In fact, in Luke, the same body of water is called the Lake of Gennesaret, and today it's called Lake Tiberias. But in the Bible, it is mostly referred to as a sea. It's a body of water that can experience intense storms due to the features of the surrounding geography. Hot, dry air at the top of nearby mountains sometimes collides with cooler, moister air nearer to the surface of the water. That results in fierce winds that can drop suddenly, without any warning, right in the middle of that lake. And when that happens, small boats caught out on the water will be in immediate danger. Well, the experienced fishermen among Jesus' disciples knew those dangers well. And when the winds whipped up and the waves churned, they were in fear for their very lives as their boat got tossed about. Even if we have never been to that particular body of water or out on that body of water, which probably most of us have not, some of us may have been caught out in a storm on the water at some time, maybe even felt ourselves in some degree of danger. And short of that, kind of direct experience, we've witnessed from afar the devastation that such storms can wreak through watching the news. Today's technology brings such distant events up close. Many of us remember, for example, Hurricane Katrina from 2005 that caused so much damage and death in New Orleans and the surrounding area. Then there was the tsunami in 2011 in Japan that wiped out entire towns and caused a nuclear accident. That wasn't a storm technically, since it was caused by an earthquake, but it clearly demonstrated the destructive potential of water. And then there was Hurricane Harvey in 2017, which led to the catastrophic flooding and the deaths of more than 100 people in Texas and Louisiana. Harvey broke the U.S. record for rainfall from a single storm, dumping 51 inches in a 24-hour period in a couple of cities along the Texas coast. And now the rainfall in Europe is causing flooding, and also in China. Such storms come unexpectedly, seemingly out of the blue, wreaking havoc in people's lives, turning their lives upside down. Other experiences can do the same: a cancer diagnosis, a job loss, a divorce, the death of somebody close, the various storms of life. And then, of course, there's the pandemic. COVID-19 arrived unexpectedly and turned all our lives upside down individually and collectively. It's been devastating, especially, of course, for those who have lost loved ones. But there have been other losses as well. Lost jobs, lost businesses, lost senior years of high school, lost wedding plans, lost hopes, lost dreams. And of course, the loss of a sense of connectedness. And beyond that, there's been fear of getting sick, fear of unknowingly passing the virus on to loved ones, well, on to anyone for that matter, fear of developing long-haul COVID symptoms with their life-altering impacts, and for some, probably the fear even of death. And so perhaps out of fear, but more, I think, for most of us, probably due to good sense, we hunkered down, like the disciples in this story, hunkered down in that boat, hanging on for dear life. And like them, we have felt at times like our collective boat was being swamped. Like when the COVID numbers were rising and the hospitals were threatened with being overwhelmed, and a temporary hospital was set up, a field hospital was set up in Shoreline. You probably remember that. At first, we were the COVID epicenter of the country, and all eyes were on us. But within months, it was New York City instead, where the virus arrived from Europe, and we were horrified and saddened by the stories and the images from there as case numbers rose, and so did deaths. And not only hospitals, but even morgues were swamped. Then the outbreak moved to the Midwest as people began to travel in the summer and spread more through the so-called super spreader events. On it went, and our collective boat rocked and rolled as we were buffeted by wave upon wave of the virus. But finally, we got the vaccines, and they have calmed the storm. There are still worrying signs out there, but the worst seems to have passed, at least for us, and at least for now. And so now we are something like the disciples in that boat after Jesus calmed the storm. The worst is over, and it's a moment of great relief. But as some in the church have pointed out, this is also a moment of opportunity, a chance to think about how we might do things differently going forward. Probably, frankly, what a lot of us would like to do is just go back exactly to the way things were. But that is not really possible because, you see, we are landing on a different shore. And again, we're not in a situation not unlike that of the disciples. When they got into the boat with Jesus, they pushed off from the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, a place that was populated by Jews, people like them. But after they cross over, they will land in an area called the Decapolis, which in Greek means 10 cities. I suppose it was something like our calling Kennewick, Pasco, and Richland the Tri-Cities. The Decapolis was a group of 10 cities on the eastern front of the Roman Empire that was similar in language and in culture, and all of them functioned together as an autonomous city-state that was dependent on Rome. And what that means is that when the disciples land on the other side, they will be in unfamiliar territory. The customs and the rules there won't be the same as what they're used to. The people there will probably think differently and act differently in some ways. They'll probably make different assumptions, and they will certainly believe some different things. There will be enough points of contact in language and ideas to make Jesus' ministry there possible, at least to some extent. But still, for the disciples, arriving there will not be like going back home after a day on the water. When they get out of that boat, they will be setting foot on a different shore. And so are we. And so is the church. So first, congregations were thrown into an unexpected and disruptive situation, one not of their own choosing, and they were forced to figure out how to weather that storm. You've been there. Now that storm has passed. And churches now have to decide how they will move ahead. And that will take some discernment. It will take being open to God's leading. As one pastor has observed in her reflection on this passage, it is in the aftermath of our storms that we must listen most closely for God to speak. And it is in the aftermath of our storms that we must allow Christ to challenge us and to reorder our ways of thinking. We don't always welcome that kind of challenge, I know. There is a lot of comfort in the familiar. But change is a given in life. That is true in every time. And we know that in this present moment, there is no going back to exactly what was. But maybe that's not the best thing to do anyway. Maybe that's not the most faithful thing to do. This past year has exposed some inequities in our culture, in our world, in our nation, problems many of us already knew were there, but which have become even more obvious during the pandemic. And some people are saying that going back to what was simply is not good enough. And possibly the pandemic has also opened our eyes to how things might be different and perhaps better in the church, how we might be more inclusive of all people, how we might be more imaginative in our ministry. Now, I won't try to name for you what that would look like in this congregation. Every church is different. But the question for us, as it was for Jesus' first disciples, is how will we respond in this present moment? Will we become anxious and fearful like they did in that boat? Will we question whether God is really with us or if God is really leading us? Or will we respond with hopefulness based on our trust in God? Will we look back wistfully at what was or look forward in faith to what can be? Jesus, this story teaches, is the master of the wind and the waves, and we can trust him to be with us through all the storms of life, and also to be with us in their aftermath, which frankly I think can be as turbulent as the storm itself if we strive to be faithful. And so I charge you as you step onto this different shore to go forward with faithfulness, open to where God might lead you, and to go forward with faith, trusting God to be with you. Amen.